Nice. That's a cute kitty. It's Mozza.
모짜.
Yeah, Mozza. It's a Mozza Dad. 여보세요?
아, 네, 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 그러면 바로 시작할까요?
네.
So, we have an interview. We're coming back with an interview content. And we have Energy Overflow Soulfist this time. It's been a while. It took me a long time because it was very hard for me to find a veteran Korean players to join us for an interview to share their classes and all that stuff, right? So we're gonna start with an intro, and as usual, we're going to do the overviews, skills, gems, combat stats, basic builds, how they use their skills, and with a solo play as well, right? The usual stuff that you guys have seen before. So let's get to it, guys.
저는 이제 한국 서버에서 1592 세믹다톤 기공사를 키우고 있는 모짜 아빠, 네, 모짜 데디라고 하고요. 유부남은 아니고 모짜는 이제 제가 모시고 사는 귀여운 치즈 고양이입니다. 그래서 아바타도 이렇게 맞춰놨고요.
His name is Mozza Dad, and Mozza is a cat, a kitty that he has, and he plays EO Soulfist. I don't know 1592.
또 선택한 이유는 평소에 약간 어떤 게임을 하든 간에 약간 좀 비주류적인 캐릭터나 좀 직업을 선택하는 변태적인 취향이 좀 있습니다. 유행하는 부류들은 플레이어보다는 해당 캐릭터들이 더 인정받고 우선되는 경향이 있고 부족하거나 불합리함을 점점 적응하고 개선해 나가면서 좀 발전되어가는 느낌을 받아가는 게 되게 재미를 느끼거든요.
So whenever he plays a game, he's a style that instead of you having like a meta build, for example, like a meta class, when a particular class does really well, what the other player says like this class into the player itself. So what he does is he plays an unpopular class at that time and try to prove it himself with the skills. So within the class that is unpopular, he tends to yes, you can. Someone has said that it's a non-meta enjoyer, and he has enough skills to prove that this class is really good.
약간 좀 계속 어떤 행동을 취하는 걸 되게 좋아해서 카 위주의 캐릭터보다는 좀 신속 위주의 캐릭터를 찾다가 세미토톤 기공사를 알게 됐고 그리고 또 순보라는 이제 좀 특출난 이동기가 있다 보니까 제가 원하는 스타일 방향이랑 좀 맞는 것 같아서 네.
So, for example, when he played, like a spec class, like a high spec class tends to require yourself in a specific pattern, more of not like a speedy pattern, but instead he looked into some of the Swift classes that spams a lot of skills that have a lot of rotation. And since the Soulfist itself has this skill called Flash Step that requires him to make a style, like a different unique styles that he could utilize proper DPSs. That's why they chose this particular class.
빠른 쿨타임이랑 또 우월한 이동기로 약간 치고 빠진 식의 좀 스타일리시함, 흔히 놀지 않는 지속 딜러이면서 다른 이제 지속 딜러들랑 다르게 꾸준히 비슷한 딜을 넣기보다는 순간적인 폭딜이 가능한 직업이라
I've had the question of what would be your recommendation of this class, right? A particular build too. So this particular class, it has very fast cooldown, as you guys see sometimes on other players. And with this fast cooldown, with the flash step, with the big movement speed, movement maneuver skills as well, your play is not going to be having pauses, and it's going to be based on how fast do your DPS is. And then they're better. And then in these kind of things where you have to piano your skills is making what this class so fun, and is what makes it unique as well. Possibly the fastest too.
추천하는 이유는 약간 글로벌석 같은 경우에는 이제 군단장이 나오기 시작했잖아요. 세믹다통의 극고점 세팅을 맞추기에는 좀 제약이 있기도 하고 또 이 금강 성공이라는 아이덴티티 때문에 레이드에 대한 적응 및 숙련도가 좀 많이 필요로 해서 버거운 면이 있을 것 같습니다. 제가 이제 처음에 이 기공사를 배울 때 들었던 말이 좀 기공사를 잘하게 되면은 로스타크 자체를 잘하게 된다였는데 처음에 뭔 소리인지 잘 몰랐거든요. 제가 이제 점점 게임을 하면서 좀 뼈저리게 경험하게 됐던 게 이제 지속 딜러면서 폭딜이 가능하다고 했던 이유가 좀 다른 딜러들이 뭐 10점 만점에 뭐 5에서 6의 데미지를 계속 넣는다고 치면은 일단 쌤의 기공사는 2점, 5점, 10점의 데미지를 넣는 직업입니다. 그래가지고 좀 구조에 적응하기 전에는 약간 변동폭이 너무 커가지고 다른 딜러들에 비해서 좀 평균값이 좀 많이 떨어집니다.
When we're talking about, the not recommendation ideas for this particular class is at a global server, right? We guys been getting Legion raids just by now, where we only have two relic sets or 2 or 3 relic sets to do. So you guys don't have the full relic sets yet. So there's a problem for that one. To make like a ceiling build, like a complete ceiling build for it, is a little tougher. And at the same time, as you guys may know, for whoever played Soulfist, there's a thing called, the hype mode, right? The hype mode Soulfist identity. This requires a lot of play, a lot of knowledge, a lot of game knowledge for you to master this particular identity. There's a saying in Korea where if you play Soulfist really well, that means you know Lostark really well as well. And then it seems like this particular statement, the longer that you play this game, what happens is, even if you're a consistent dealer, consistent DPS dealer, you can also focus on bursting as well. The reason why is because, let's say out of 10, like at a point 10, most classes do up to 5 to 6 points of like damage worth of DPS. Let's say, out of 10, let's say your performance is out of 10. Most classes do 5 and 6. But the issue is, for Soulfist, since there's so many situations where you can do more DPS or less DPS, like outperform and underperform, it goes from 2, 5, and then up to 10, right? So the better the player, Soulfist is one of those classes that if you're a better player, you can just outright out damage people too. That's why he wanted to recommend / not recommend either, because it's just so hard to manage DPSs accordingly. Yep, look at that, guys. 1813 Swiftness too. Sick. That's huge. Let's talk about from skills from the top first. Okay.
내공 방출 같은 경우에는 일단 트라이포드는 빠른 준비, 또 뭐 정화, 아니면 또 강인함, 그리고 공격 준비 사용하고 있고요. 룬 같은 경우에는 뭐 광분 또는 질풍 이렇게 사용하면 되는데, 대신에 이제 광분 같은 경우가 확률이 좀 낮은데 이 내공 방출이 단타 스킬이라서 약간 좀 취향이 약간 갈립니다. 내공 방출이 좀 선호 모션이 좀 있기 때문에 질풍을 채워나는 분도 있긴 합니다.
So let's talk about energy release first, and then as you notice, he uses the quick prep and then shadow purification. You guys know this as well, and then he also uses tenacity sometimes because you don't want to get paralyzed, correct? And then you have ready attack. So these two are very important because this particular tripod increases your damage whenever you use it. These are some of the basic stuff that you guys know. And as for runes, there is Rage rune, and then there's also Galewind as well. But sometimes this is a preference, and when people use his Rage, it doesn't pop as much because it's a single target, single activating skill. But sometimes you use it to hopefully to activate and then try to squeeze in more skills in.
그리고 정화 같은 경우에는 피 막 엄청 그렇게 중요하진 않거든요. 그러니까 진짜 필요로 한 레이드, 뭐 이제 쿠쿠 같은 경우에 이제 뭐 공포도 있고 화상도 있고 기절도 있고 그렇잖아요.
네.
그래서 보통 쿠쿠 갈 때나 아니면 이제 아부 육관문에 이제 경직 면역이 없다 보니까 이걸 쓰고 딜사이클을 시작해야 되는데, 평소에는 이제 강인함을 찍고 최대한 안전하게 딜사이클을 시작하는 편입니다.
Right. So, for example, in this case, he uses purification on something like Valtingate 1 for bleed, or Kukul Seidan where you have the fear that requires like a little bit of purification, right? So, in those kind of situations, you can kind of use the purification for additional purify, additional cleanse. But most of the time, he uses tenacity because this particular starts your cycle, right? So if this skill is cut off, you're going to be lacking a lot of DPS because you need to use that skill immediately. So because of that case, unless you require to use unless you require cleanse for the whole party, they tend to take tenacity a little more.
다음 스킬은 난화격, 주들기고요. 트라이포드는 이제 공격 강화, 또 냉정한 움직임, 잔상 공격, 그리고 룬은 가장 높은 등급의 질풍을 주면 됩니다.
So Merciless Pummel, this is one of your main DPS skill, and then you see you have the tripod as hard hitter, cold hearted, and then double up, right? So you guys maximize level 5. This is a main DPS skill, and since it's the main DPS skill, you have your highest level of Galewind rune equipped over here.
그 다음 스킬은 선물진기, 빠른 준비, 공격 강화, 예리한 판단에 질풍을 사용하면 되고요.
So we also have Crippling Barrier, another DPS skill. We have Quick Prep, Hard Hitter, and then Keen Judgment with another additional Galewind rune that is right below the legendary rune.
그 다음은 이제 카운터 겸 시너지 스킬, 회선격추라는 스킬이고요. 속동강화 또는 탁월한 행동, 그리고 이 투지 강화, 이게 시너지 있는 거고, 그리고 강인한 어깨 또는 적극적인 공격, 그리고 출혈 또는 압도를 사용합니다.
For Bolting Crash, so this is for counter and then for synergy as well. So if you take a look, we have Violent, which is increase your distance, and then you have the Fighting Spirit enhancement, which is your synergy skill, right? Because it increases attack power by 6%. And then you also have Tough Shoulder, which it instantly 2 meters forward, like, and but you can also use aggressiveness as well. But it seems like this is more of a preference based, except the second area of the tripod with the synergy skill on. And for runes, he put in bleed rune, but he also puts in overwhelm as well.
그리고 이게 이렇게 선택지가 두 가지씩 이렇게 제가 말씀드렸잖아요. 일단 이 회성격추 같은 경우에는 이 데미지 빼고는 진짜 모든 걸 가지고 있는 스킬이거든요. 뭐 부파도 2렙 달려 있고 무력화도 높고 카운터도 있고 시너지도 있고 정말 다 좋은 스킬인데 이 트라이포드랑 룬에 따라서 용도가 조금씩 달라집니다. 그래서 이 두 가지 같은 경우에는 제가 설명을 한번 드릴게요. 일단
So additionally, he has mentioned two of these tripods for both of them, right? Apparently, this bolting crash handles all of the utility that is required for the Soulfist, right? Which is very nice because the skill itself has weakness level 2. It also has decent stagger. All these other attributes that is required, that is not a DPS skill, right? Since that is the case, he has two tripods to it, and then he's going to explain later on how would you exchange these two tripods to make your play more viable in a certain situation in raids too, which is pretty interesting.
그 다음은 이제 약간 기공사의 좀 특색 있는 이동기 순보고요. 순보는 이제 탁월한 기동성이랑 승리 환호, 가장 높은 등급의 속행을 주면 좋습니다. 순보 같은 경우에는 체인 스킬이거든요. 그래서 이렇게 세 번을 쓰는데 이 세 번에 다 룬이 발동이 돼서 속행의 쿨타임 감소도 되게 잘 받거든요.
Yeah, we have Flash Step. You guys like Flash Step a lot, right? So Flash Step, we have Excellent Mobility and Victor Shout. And the rune is usually Charge Rune. And the reason why is because this is a chain skill where you press the skill 3 times. And when you press it 3 times, every time you press that skill, you have a chance to activate that Quick Charge Rune. As you notice, in Korean server, we have Legendary Quick Charge Rune. Most players use the Quick Charge Rune on this Flash Step skill.
그리고 또 다음 스킬은 열의 신장. 열의 신장 같은 경우에는 공격 강화, 혹독한 훈련, 그리고 화려한 공격을 사용하고요. 이 같은 경우는 룬이 솔직히 막 엄청 잘 어울리는 건 없어요. 일단 만약에 단심을 쓰게 되는 경우에는 여기 단죄를 쓰면 되고, 아까 회성격추에서 만약 출혈을 빼고 압도를 쓰게 되면은 이제 여기에 출혈을 넣거나 뭐 압도를 넣거나 속행을 넣거나 약간 좀 취향적으로 사용하면 됩니다.
So we have Heavenly Squash after, which is a DPS skill. We have Hard Hitter, Harsh Training, and then Exquisite Attack. So for this particular skill, it's a multi-hit skill. So in this case, he has put in Conviction Rune for Conviction Judgment combination. So particular for runes, I asked him for confirmation. For example, you can also have a Quick Charge. But if you happen to put Overwhelm on your Bolting Crash, Bleed Rune would also be in the Heavenly Squash instead.
그 다음은 이제 섬멸파. 그리고 이 섬멸파 같은 경우에는 이번에 그 패치되면서 되게 사용하기 좋아져가지고 지금 거의 대부분의 기공사 유저들이 쓰고 있는 스킬인데 저도 사용하고 있고요. 섬멸파를 쓰게 되면은 일단 강인함, 그리고 약점 포착, 맹렬한 습격, 그 다음에 질풍을 사용하고 있습니다.
So for Energy Blast, this skill has been updated recently at the recent balance patch. So for particular this skill, if he uses it, it will be at Tenacity, Weak Point Detection, and then Ferocious Strike, and adding Galewind Rune on top of that as well.
그리고 기공장은 빠른 준비, 강화된 파동, 공간 팽창을 사용하고 있고요. 여기도 만약에 단심을 쓰게 되면은 심판을 끼게 되고 그것도 아니면 또 속행이랑 출혈. 그리고 여기 압도도 여기 안 써 있는데 무력화가 안 써 있는데 무력화도 있는 스킬이거든요. 네, 그래서 압도를 사용해도 좋습니다.
So last skill, we have Force Orb, and we have Quick Prep, Powerful Wave, and then Scattering Wave. And in this particular skill, if you happen to use Conviction Judgment Rune, right? You have the Conviction Rune on Heavenly Squash. You would use it on the Force Orb for Judgment to pop it off. But if you don't use a Conviction Judgment Rune at all, what's happening is you would particularly use either a Quick Charge Rune on top of this, or you can actually put Overwhelm. And the reason why Overwhelm is okay is even if the skill particular does not say that it has stagger, it has stagger. So technically, if you want additional stagger, you can put more Overwhelms on runes on top of this.
그리고 이 섬멸파가 특히 그 글로벌석 같은 경우에는 좀 지배셋도 사용하기 힘들고 신속 수치가 별로 높지 않을 거기 때문에 환각 세트를 추천드리면서 또 낙영장을 섬멸파보다 낙영장이나 뭐 풍레일 강포 둘 중에 하나를 좀 추천을 드리는데 일단 좀 더 빠릿하고 좀 스타일리시함을 원하면 좀 낙영장이고 그리고 또 한
음.
방이 세면 풍래 일광포인데 이거는 이제
음.
약간 섬멸파가 나오고 난 다음엔 약간 완전 하이 호환이 돼버려서 지금은 사용을
Mm.
안 하는 걸 추천드리고요.
Continuing from Energy Blast, for example, I saw some of you guys in chat saying like it's a little too slow. The reason why the Energy Blast might not work for you guys in the global server just yet is because there's not enough swiftness to get covered, and there are also particular relic sets that will help you to make Energy Blast more viable. So instead, for NA players, focusing on something like Tempest Blast and Shadowbreaker is another choice that we can talk about a little later. Basically, Tempest Blast is a shorter burst, but apparently it's the worst version for Energy Blast. But it's just that the players' builds are not ready for Energy Blast yet. So using something like a Tempest Blast before to cover up the DPS and then switching to Energy Blast later might be a better choice. But at the same time, Shadowbreaker is also a good choice to like a quick hit that can fill up your DPS gaps too.
일단 지금 근데 섬멸파가
네.
진짜 데미지가 세거든요. 지금 나나격급의 지금 주력기가 됐는데 백어택 나나격이 가장 높고 그 다음에 섬멸파랑 나나격이 좀 비슷비슷하고 근데
네.
이게 쿨이 되게 길어요. 그래도 내가 좀 더 딜을 넣겠다면은 섬멸파를 사용하면 되고 하지만 나는 좀 쿨타임이 좀 버겁고 좀 사이클도 중요하고 좀 더 빠릿함을 원한다. 그러면 그냥 나경장 이렇게 고르시면 됐습니다.
So again, with the Energy Blast, apparently Energy Blast now does almost the top damage comparable to Merciless Pummel. Your Merciless Pummel does most damage as a Soulfist, and Energy Blast is like almost the same level if you're not doing a back attack with Merciless Pummel. So technically, this skill you have to take them. It's just that it has a longer cooldown, which it will kind of hinder your cycle, like the overall cycle, to make it smooth. But besides that point, with the high cooldown, you still technically use it for that big push of DPS that you need. But if you have this as an uncomfortable point, you can particularly you can use different skills to cover your like a pianoing or something, like to fit in more cooldowns in general.
지금 제가 이렇게 탁월한 행동이랑 강인한 어깨가 이렇게 찍혀 있는데
네.
이게 두 개가 이거랑 이제 또 속도 강화랑 이 적극의 차이가 뭐냐면은 어깨는 이걸 사용하게 되면은 그냥 이렇게 치거든요. 어깨를.
네.
대신 되게 빠르고 약간 이동을 하게 된단 말이에요.
네.
일단 빠르기 때문에 속도 강화를 사용을 하지 않아도 돼요. 대신에 사거리가 짧아가지고 좀 1m라도 좀 거리를 늘려주는 탁월한 행동을 찍게 되는 거고 그리고 이럴 때는 또 출혈을 사용하면 되고요. 이렇게 사용하게 될 때는 또 이
네.
속도 강화 이거 같은 경우에는 이 적극적인 공격이 3타를 때리는데 이 속도가 좀 느리다 보니까 좀 공격 속도를 좀 추가를 해주고 또 이거를 쓰게 되면은 일단 무력화가 이거를 어깨를 쓸 때에 비해서 한 2배가 더 높아요. 그래서 거의 회오리 수류탄급의 무력화가 되거든요. 그래서 좀 더 압도를 달아서 좀 더 무력화에 치중을 하겠다 싶으면은 압도를 끼고 속도 강화에 적극을 쓰고 평소에는 그냥 탁월한 행동, 강인한 어깨, 출혈을 쓰고.
아, 오케이.
네.
평소에는 이렇게 쓰시는 거죠? 빠르게.
네, 평소에 이렇게 쓰고
okay.
무력이 필요하면은 이렇게 쓰고.
So for Valen and Tough Shoulder, he showed you the animation for it, right? So this particular tripod combo would be based on just quick movement with adding into the synergies that you acquire. And you guys also dashed it little 2 meters, so you can kind of use it as a maneuver skill as well. However, he also shown you the other tripod combination where you add enhanced speed and aggressiveness. So you add enhanced speed and aggressiveness is because it increases your hit by 3 hits instead of 1. It's a little bit slower, but the big difference is if you add an overwhelm room if you want, etc. But the staggering itself is almost double the difference. For example, it is as big as you throwing a whirlwind bomb. So the staggering itself is actually pretty huge for Soulfist for this particular skill. So sometimes if you do like a raid that requires a big stagger check, they tend to bring a different tripod to do more stagger for your team. But instead, most of the time, if he's using for a synergy, you would use it on the initial one that just does a little quick dash. But if you go into raid that requires a lot more stagger, you would switch your tripod around to provide more stagger for your whole team.
아 그리고 약간 또 팁을 하나 또 드리자면은
네.
또 이게 스킬 포인트가 좀 부족할 거 아니에요. 그럴 때는 일단 이걸 이 회생 격추를 7레벨로 쓰면 되는 것도 있고 또 이 적극을 쓰게 되면은 이 모든 타의 카운터가 터져요. 그래서 카운터 판정이 되게 좋은 편이에요.
So additional tip for this skill, because this is one of your main utility skills, so he has a lot of additional tip for this. So you can, if you're lacking skill points, you can put it to level 7 as well for that synergy plus counter. But if you put it to level 10 and put aggressiveness, you notice he hits 3 times, right? All those 3 hits count as a counter. So the judgment for countering is also very good. So let's say you press it too early, your other hits is gonna counter for you. And if you press it too late, your first hit is actually pretty fast in animation, so you can still counter too. So we're gonna talk about gems.
보석 같은 경우에는 일단 주딜기, 이제 오딜기에는 다 멸화랑 홍염을 사용해주고, 그다음에 한 자리 남는 홍염은 내공방출을.
So you notice he puts on the main DPS skills as a damage gems. So 5 damage gems, which is his main damage skills, right? The energy blast, he has merciless palm, and he also has crippling barrier, and he also has merciless pummel. It seems like since merciless pummel does the most damage for your Soulfist, he has that as level 10, and then the rest of them he has as level 9, but it can increase it accordingly. And then since the main DPS skill, which is 5 of them, also requires a cooldown gem, right? So he puts a cooldown gem to cover up his DPS skill, and then you have a 1 slot left over, which it goes into energy release.
보석의 우선순위 같은 경우에는 일단 나나격이 주딜기라고 이제 말씀드렸잖아요. 그래서 나나격을 먼저 가장 높은 멸화를 주고, 그 다음엔 섬멸파, 약간 이런 순서로 가는 게 좋고요. 또 이 내공방출 같은 경우가 물론 이게 딜 사이클의 시작이기 때문에 내공방출도 홍염이 그냥 높을수록 무조건 좋고, 그리고 만약에 내가 좀 딜 사이클을 맞추겠다 하면은 나나격 홍염이랑 내방 홍염이랑 마이너스 2렙을 하면 대충 맞거든요. 그래서 막 7렙이면은 5렙 이런 식으로.
So I explained about the importance on like the importance ranking for gems as well. So for gems, Merciless Pummel is your number 1 important skill. So you would put the highest damage gem plus cooldown on Merciless Pummel so that you can rotate as fast as you can. Afterwards, you have Energy Blast, right? Energy Blast does the second most damage. So you work on your gems on the Energy Blast afterwards, and then you work on the rest of the skills that does damage, right? At the same level. And as for Energy Release though, Energy Release requires you to have, as high cooldown gem as possible, but to do actual calculation, as you guys may know, you have to start with an Energy Release to do your DPS. So to calculate the actual cooldown gems, it would be Merciless Pummel cooldown gem minus 2 levels. So if it's like level 10 over here, at minimum you should have is at level 8. So let's say you have Merciless Pummel level 7, guys. It would be level 5 on energy release minimum to make it a rotational cycle. So this is like one of those good tips that that can actually package your cooldowns proper so that your character rotates properly. Just having it higher level doesn't make it viable all the time because you have to calculate it so that everything fits into place.
가장 최우선도를 하자면은 일단 내공방출의 빠른 준비랑 공격 준비고요. 일단 이게 공증이 있다 보니까 무조건 필요하고, 또 이것도 내공방출이 있어야지 결국 딜사이클을 시작하기 때문에 조금이라도 쿨타임을 줄이려면은 일단 빠른 준비랑 공격 준비는 갖고 가야 되고, 그 다음에는 이 주들기인 나나격 얘네 3개. 그리고 그리고 뭐 한 자리 한다면은 섬멸파를 사용하게 된다면 또 얘네 2개 더 필요하고.
So for tripod, guys, like someone asked you guys what the important tripods are. For example, you guys have in the library, you have 6 slots that for you guys can transfer immediately, correct? So for that level 4s that you guys should work on, number 1 was energy release, quick prep, and ready attack. This is number 1 tripod because your DPS cycle is dependent on your energy release every time. So obviously, the ready attack increases your damage by 55.6%. That's a lot. So you need that level 4 immediately, as fast as you can, and then you have the cooldown. Afterwards, your main DPS skills is Merciless Pummel, right? You have 3 tripods that requires you to level up. So if you level that up first, that'll be 5 tripods in total. Then you'll be really well off from at this point. And then you can add, if you're happening to use Energy Blast, you can work on your Energy Blast tripods afterwards. From this point on, you should just keep on leveling your tripods on the DPS skills. So that would cover up the most important tripods that you would need to work on to go.
그리고 또 뭐 나머지 트라이포드들은 뭐 이제 얘네 딜들은 다 챙겨줘야 되고, 그리고 빠른 준비들은 여기 빠른 준비가 선물 진기랑 또 기공장 이렇게 달려 있거든요.
네.
얘네는 그나마 조금은 우선도가 좀 낮고, 그나마 그다음엔 뭐 순보 이 탁월한 기동성 같은 경우에는 약간 좀 취향이 좀 갈려요. 이게 4렙이면은 스페이스 거리랑 딱 맞거든요. 그래서 그게 편한 사람들은 4렙을 쓰고, 뭐 저는 그냥 긴 게 좋아서 5렙 찍었고.
So that's interesting. So for additional tripods, so for Force Orb and Crippling Barrier, you can actually get the quick preps, but it's not as important, because it's in within the rotations anyway, right? So Crippling Barrier, Force Orb, you can increase the quick prep, but you can work on it later. But as for Flash Step though, some people have it as level 5 and some people have it as level 4. And the reason why you have it as level 4 is because if you have the excellent mobility as level 4 instead of 5, it's exactly the same distance as your spacebar. So people who are preferring, oh, I want my flash step to be the exact same distance as my spacebar. People tend to do that. But if you want just a longer distance, you have it as level 5, which is in his case where he just put it on level 5 because he just likes a longer distance. So it really depends on the preference side. And as for the victory shout, he's gonna explain a little more later, little more right now.
일단 이 순보에 있는 승리의 환호 같은 경우에는 이 내공방출의 이 공격 준비랑 중첩이 안 돼요. 네, 그래가지고 뭐 필요로 하다는 사람도 있는데, 저는 이렇게 우선도를 높게 보진 않고, 대신에 이건 중첩이 안 돼도 활용은 할 수 있는데, 보통 이제 어떤 상황에 사용을 하냐면은 내공방출을 딱 키고 딜 사이클 시작을 했는데 스킬을 다 못 박을 때가 있을 거 아니에요. 그럴 때는 순보 하고 스킬을 쓰는 거죠. 네.
아, 그 세 번 하면은 그만큼 다 올라가는 거예요?
네, 이게 13%, 13%, 13%, 13%,
아, 그러네.
39%.
The victory shout. So this is not more of an important tripod compared to energy release because it doesn't stack with energy release. That's the problem. But the usage of this particular tripod is, as you guys seen him showing a demo, was, let's say you do energy release and rotate your skills. Sometimes you have leftover skills for you to cycle. When that is the case, you flash step 3 times and use one of your skills so that you have the increase in damage, that buff and stuff. So yeah, so he's showing you here. Then you can use the skill afterwards to get the full synergy up, just in case that something happens and you won't be able to squeeze in all your damages within the energy release buff.
특성은 일단 치명이랑 신속을 사용하고 신속을 가장 높게, 무조건 다 높게 챙겨야 됩니다. 일단 이유는 이 기공사 같은 경우에는 이 금강성공이라는 이 아이덴티티를 사용하는데 이 제한 시간이 있거든요. 그래서 이때 최대한 스킬을 많이 우겨 넣어야 되기 때문에 조금이라도 쿨타임을 줄여줄 수 있게 높은 신속치를 요구합니다.
So talking about combat stats a little bit, Soulfist is very simple. As you need as high as swiftness as you can. The reason why is because, as you guys may know, if you go hype mode, within the particular amount of time, you will need to use as many skills as you can. So in order for that to be possible, you need as high as swiftness as possible, in order for you to use at least one more skill to push it in during this hype phase. Right, so since spec is not required for energy overflow Soulfist, you go crit on the secondary stat for additional crit rates. And let's talk about engravings now.
네, 일단 저 같은 경우에는 일단 원한, 예리한 둔기, 돌격대장, 세믹타통, 또 질량 증가, 아드레날린을 사용하고 있고, 일단 북미 속 같은 경우에는 아직 유물 액세서리를 사용하니까 원한, 이제 아드레날린 3렙, 그리고 세믹타통, 예리한 둔기 이렇게 고정에다가 이 돌대랑 질량 증가를 좀 선택하시면 됩니다. 이 고정에 이제 돌격대장이나 질량 증가를 선택하시면 됩니다.
So going over his particular build right now. So the build he's using right now is Grudge, Keen Blunt, Raid Captain, and the class engraving, Energy Overflow, and then he has increased mass and level 1 adrenaline, right? And then, as you guys may know, you guys have relic accessories only. So if he wants to go, if we are doing level 5 3s, it would be Grudge, Keen Blunt, class Energy Overflow, and adrenaline level 3 would be almost mandatory. And then you have a choice between Raid Captain or increased mass.
이 정도 이렇게 갖고 갈 수 있거든요. 세맥이를. 네, 유물대?
Right. So this is also another option too, because you can technically go level 1 on energy overflow, so you have level 2 adrenaline instead. So this is a 5.
이렇게 갖고 갈 수 있는데 일단 치적 시너지를 받게 되면은 일단 더 강한 건 맞는데 대신에 이 세맥 5악셀을 사용하게 돼서 좀 악셀 값이 비쌀 수 있는데 약간 글섭 같은 경우에는 아직 정보가 별로 없을 것 같아서
맞아요.
가능할 것
예.
같기도 하네요. 네, 극고점이면 이거고 근데 좀 약간 좀 무난하게 좀 갈 거면은 아까 말씀드린 것처럼 여기다가 이제 돌격이랑 질량 증가만 선택. 그러니까 기공사 치적이 되게 낮아요. 지금 제 기준에서 한 30몇 퍼센트 나오는데
So since success, so I was talking about the class level 3 and then versus like adrenaline level 3, as you guys been talking about. The reason why I asked is because let's say some accessories tend to be super expensive. So instead, if he read the class engraving to legendary and getting the 3 accessory enables him to get like the damage that he needs with the least amount of gold, right? Therefore, sometimes if you can get the level 1 accessory for the class, the 5-3, like that's also good. But the choices are pretty much solid in terms of you have Grudge, Keen Blood, and then class, and then you have Adrenaline level 3, and then you have a choice between Raid Captain or increased mass. And the reason why is, which he doesn't need to explain, as I explained to you guys multiple times, if you have a high swiftness, and you also the hype mode gives you additional attack speed and attack speed to a point that this is not going to be a penalty engraving for you for increased mass. And same case for Raid Captain, since your high swiftness, your movement speed is high enough to make this viable as well. So they're basically exactly the same thing.
일단 노각지배 같은 경우는 아마 북미 쪽에서는 쓰기 많이 힘들 거예요. 왜냐면은 일단 제가 좀 정리를 해봤는데 일단 아까 스킬 쪽에 그 보면 이제 열의 신장에 제가 지금 단주 심판을 쓰고 있잖아요. 네, 이것도 약간 노각지배랑 연결이 되는 건데 기공사 같은 경우에는 아까 그 타이머가 있다고 말씀드렸잖아요.
네.
시간 내에 최대한 많은 딜을 넣어야 된다고. 그래서 이제 단심을 또 쓰면은 스킬쿨이 줄어들잖아요. 뭐 그래서 사용을 하는 것도 있지만 이제 노각지배 때문에 사용을 해야 되거든요.
So what we're going to talk about is you guys are going into the full relic sets, right? And what I've been asking is, there are 2 different relic sets. There are Dominion set and then there's Hallucination set for EO Soulfist, right? And the Dominion set requires a lot of additional attributes for you to make it viable, and one of them is Conviction Judgment. For example, if you use Conviction Judgment and then use the skill and then use the Awakening afterwards, your Awakening cooldown is just low enough for your Dominion buff to be up 100% of the time. And at the same time, as you guys may know, as he mentioned, which is the earlier point of the intro, is Soulfist has a hype mode, right? And when he does a hype mode, within given time, you will need to squeeze in as much DPS as you can. And Conviction Judgment lowers a little bit more on the cooldown, so it can actually squeeze in more DPS skills within that time frame. But with that being said, that would be like the intro part of like, what kind of relic sets that you should utilize.
일단 북미 쪽에서 좀 힘들 것 같다는 이유가 일단 전설 단죄 심판 이것도 있고
네.
또 이제 지배 세트가 궁극기를 쓰면 이제 지속 시간이 있는 거잖아요.
네.
이제 악몽 같은 경우에는 켰을 때 쭉 가는데 이제 노각지배가 이제 지배 세트 같은 경우는 이제 2분 지속인데 웬만하면은 이게 지속 효과랑 궁극기 쿨타임이랑 맞물리지가 않을 거란 말이에요.
네.
분명히 비는 그 깡통 시간이 생긴단 말이죠. 근데 이제 그거를 이제 한국 서버 같은 경우에는 높은 신속이랑 단도 심판으로 이제 그거를 활용을 할 수 있게 되는 거거든요. 일단 이 지배 세트 같은 경우에는
각성으로 커버하는 게 있었죠. 네.
네, 원래는 이제 지배 세트 자체가 좀 이 각성이라는 좀 데미지를 포기한 각인 채용을 강제케 해가지고 이 궁극기 횟수랑 쿨타임 감소로 좀 지배 세트랑 같이 써라 하고 이렇게 만든 세트인데 그럴 거면은 차라리 환각이 더 셀 것 같아요. 그러니까 환각이랑 지배 세트랑 차이가 이거를 말씀드리는 게 낫겠구나. 이 3단 때 보면은
Let's go an example.
네. 이렇게 이 내공 그러니까 이게 20초거든요. 20초?
It's 20-second on third hype mode.
근데 이때 이제 이 흔히 내공 방출, 난화격, 섬멸파 얘네가 딱 3번이 들어가거든요. 지금 제가 사이클 좀 잘못 돌렸는데 아무튼 이 삼내난, 예, 그러니까 산내공 방출, 뭐 난하계 소멸파 이걸 돌리기 위해서 하는 건데 이게
네.
집에는 쿨타임이 짧기 때문에 이게 돼요. 좀 편하게 되는데 평가 세트
아,
같은 경우에는 좀 치적도 보완이 되고 어느 정도 데미지도 나오는 건 맞는데 이게 너무 힘듭니다. 이게 어느 정도의 홍염이랑 신속치가 높아야지 되기 때문에
네.
네, 지배가 좀 플레이하기 편해서 웬만하면 지배를 좀 사용을 하고 있죠.
Yep. So basically, what he have explained was when he goes to Hype 3 mode, right? It's energy release and merciless pummel. You can do it 3 times, as you guys just showed it to you, right? The full cycle rotates 3 times within that Hype 3 mode. And in order for that to happen, if you have the Dominion set, that's actually super easier. But let's say you go some like a hallucination set, your cooldown's a little bit higher, right? Because you don't have that Dominion cooldown. You will need to require like maybe like a higher cooldown gem. But the point is, since the rotation needs to be at least 3 skill rotation within the Hype 3 mode, it requires like you have multiple builds that is based off on that goal of that you're trying to achieve. So as I asked the question on, so for Dominion, so what you guys know how Dominion works, as I explained a couple of times, is let's say Dominion, you have the buff for 2 minutes, right? And since you have the buff for 2 minutes, you have to use the awakening every 2 minutes. But since the awakening cooldown is really long, people add in awakening so that they can use the awakening to reset that cooldown. And as you guys may have seen, multiple people do that. So I asked the question of, if you have awakening and then go Dominion set, is it versus just a hallucination set? As you see, said that hallucination sets should be better, because if you go awakening, that awakening engraving is not a damage engraving, right? That's why if you just go full damage engraving plus if you go hallucination set, it'll be much better. You'll be much better off, and then maybe switch up to a higher setting later. And then you do that for the Dominion set. You could use Conviction Judgment plus without the awakening, and then activate the Dominion buff set accordingly. So you do that for the additional cooldown to rotate your skills 3 times within Hype 3 or Hype 2.
대신에 기공사 같은 경우에는 좀 신속 수치가 좀 낮아도 근데
음,
금강 성공 자체에 이제 쿨타임 감소가 있거든요.
음.
5%, 10%, 25%가 있어서 만약에 제가 지금 북미 쪽에 이제 특성합이 얼마나 되는지 잘 모르겠지만 대충 한 1600을 기준으로 해서 만약에 2단 때 단심을 쓰지 않고 궁을 쓰면은 일단 궁이랑 지배 세트랑 딱 13초가 딱 비어요. 그리고 또 3단 때 쓰게 되면은 궁극기가 14초가 더 빨리 돌고.
So for example, in this case, let's say for NA, you really want to do conviction. 그 단심까지 플러스 해서요?
단심 안 쓰고요.
So without using conviction judgment, let's say your swiftness is 1600, since the hype mode itself gives you cooldown, which is 5, 10, and then 25%. If you have level 2 of the hype mode with the 1600 swiftness, your lack of cooldown on the awakening skill itself will be 13 seconds. But if you put it on the third hype mode,
2단 때 아니면 3단 때요?
3단 때요.
3단 때는 14초가 더 빨리 돌아요.
So and for the third mode, you're actually faster in 14 seconds. So you can actually utilize this point and activate your Dominion buff accordingly. So technically, since Soulfist's identity gauge also have additional cooldown, what you can utilize this Dominion set by using that plus 1600.
그리고 만약에 또 단심을 쓰면은 그만큼 더 줄어들긴 하는데 대신에 그러면 지금 깡통 시간을 없애려면 3단 때 많이 써야 되잖아요. 3단 때가 20초밖에 안 되는 시간인데 가장 센 타이밍인데 어차피 그 궁은 이제 신속이니까 하나도 안 세요. 시전 시간도 길고.
그렇죠.
그래가지고 3단 때 계속 궁 쓰고 끊었다가 궁 쓰고 끊었다가 하기에는 솔직히 아직은 좀 이 신속 1600으로는 좀 힘들 것 같습니다.
To get the Dominion set, you transform to the hype mode and then you use your awakening to get that awakening cooldown to keep that Dominion buff up. The reason why this is a worse choice is because you have an animation on using the awakening, right? And since if you're using the animation on the awakening, the third level hype mode is your top DPS, highest ceiling top DPS time, right? Therefore, if you are using this thing to do the Dominion reset, you may be missing Yeah, you may be missing that time to do the DPS because the awakening itself doesn't do that much damage since you're going full high swiftness anyways, right? So later on, when you guys tend to have higher swiftness, which is like 1800 plus, and then with the conviction judgment rune, you can naturally do it without the hype buff or even like a lower level hype buff, hype time, so that you can rotate it accordingly.
그래서 일단 지금 제 스펙인 1800인 기준으로는 단심을 안 쓰고도 이제 2단 때 현타가 2초, 그리고 또 3단 때는 오히려 궁극기가 34초가 더 빨리 돌거든요. 그래서 이렇게 쓰면은 더 훨씬 빨리 돌아가지고 일단 신속이 못해도 제가 알기로는 1780 정도가 이제 마지노선으로 알고 있어요. 좀 사용하기 편한 신속으로.
So it says in order for like multiple testing, right? The fact that again the goal is to have the hype 3 mode and then rotate skills as fast as you can, correct? To make this the most efficient and easy to do is you need about 1760 to 1780 swiftness to make it more comfortable on these rotations that you guys that everyone's trying to do.
그래서 약간 좀 결론을 좀 내드리자면은
네.
일단 지금 단심 챙기기도, 그러니까 단심 룬 구하기도 힘들고 또 신속 챙기기도 힘들고 그러다 그리고 또 이제 아무래도 좀 힘들 거란 말이에요. 그러니까 단심 활용하는 것도 힘들고 또 내공방출이랑 같은 금강성공 때문에 머리 아픈데 뭐 지배 세트도 깡통 시간까지 또 부담까지 더해지니까 그래서 제가 북미 서 기준으로는 아직 환각을 사용하는 걸 좀 추천을 드리고 좀 환각을 쓰면서 기공사 자체에 좀 익숙해진 다음에 나중에 차차 이제 뭐 팔찌가 나오고 뭐 단심을 구하고 그때 이제 노각지배를 사용하는 걸 좀 추천드립니다.
So let's get to the fun part then. Let's get into the fun part. The skill combinations and playstyle, guys. That's what you guys wanted to see. You guys been waiting for that.
지금 제가 원래 쓰는 콤보는 원래 쓸 때는 원래 이렇게 기공장이 중간중간에 들어가요.
아, 중간에 들어간. Oh. So you guys notice how he's squeezing in all the skills within the energy overflow? I mean, energy release.
네, 이게 일단 지배 세트 사이클인데 이 쿨타임이 빠르니까 가능한 거예요.
Holy shit, 17 million.
또 만약에 근데 환각 세트를 가게 되면은 쿨타임이 아까 좀 부족하다고 말씀드렸잖아요.
네네.
환각 때는 이때 이 중간중간 사이 기공장이 없어요. 그래서 환각대로 예를 들면은 내공방출, 열의 신장, 난하격, 기공장, 뭐 섬멸파, 산물증기. 네.
그리고 거기에서 기공장이 안 들어간다는 거죠?
네, 지금은 제가 원래 했던 거는 내공방출, 열의 신장, 기공장, 난하격 하고 섬멸파 하고 기공장이 한 번 더 들어가는.
Oh. So you notice, so what he's explaining is his particular build right now is he does energy release, merciless pummel, energy blast, and then he also uses a force orb. And after this particular high ceiling build, you can use force orb again once more, at that full cycle of the energy release. So you're missing. So technically, if you do the hallucination build, you are missing one force orb. That's about it. That's what he was saying. And since you can squeeze in one more force orb, it's just that much more DPS. As you may see here, has been rotating right now. So you notice he's been squeezing in that force orb once more, because the cooldown is so much faster. Yeah, that's crazy though. He's getting that 20 million though. 20 million DPS. 아드도 지속도 되게 쉽게 되는 거 맞죠?
아, 약간 그것도 약간 설명드릴 수 있는데 아드가 이 순보에 다 써요. 3번. 그리고 또 이것도 써요. 키는 것도.
Right. So since flash step and the adrenaline on the switching increases your adrenaline stacks, that's how he starts his combo. So 3 and then 4, 5 and then 6, you have a full stack of adrenaline immediately. That's why adrenaline is super good for Soulfists.
또 뭐 아드 유지 같은 거는 이제 기공장 정도가 이제 쿨이 짧고 되게 부담이 없는 스킬이거든요.
네.
그래서 평소에 그냥 이거를 그냥 툭툭 써도 되는데 저 같은 경우에는 일단 1단을 켜요. 그럼 1스택 순보, 순보, 순보하면 접근, 회승격추, 내공 방출 하면 이미 6스택이에요.
So as you
네.
guys see over there, right? So when he's going around, let's say you're doing a fight, you dash a little bit, you transform once for that stack, and then you use your utility skill, which is the cooldown for the synergy, and then if you start using your energy release, you'll be at full stack of adrenaline. So these are these smaller tips that people will need to practice and master the class to a point that you kind of know when things are completely ready, when you kind of know when things are completely ready to go, and then rotating skills accordingly. Like, this requires a lot of time and effort practicing the class too. Yep.
네, 그래서 아드 유지는 뭐 그 정도 하는 거 편이고, 일단 플레이할 때 뭐 가장 중요한 거는 일단 이 내공 방출 이 지속 시간 6초거든요.
네.
근데 이거에 되게 적응이 돼야 돼요. 그래가지고 저 같은 경우에는 연습할 때 하루에 허수아비 이거 딜사이클만 한 3시간씩 쳤거든요. 네,
네.
그러니까 이거 왜냐면 실전에서는 막 여기 막 애가 막 발탄이 막 낙사시키고 있는데
네.
이걸 못 본단 말이에요. 눈이 안 간단 말이에요.
네.
그래서 내가 이제 뭐 현타 때, 뭐 2단 때, 뭐 3단 때 이제 내가 스킬을 이만큼 박았으면은 이제 지속 시간이 몇 초 남았겠다. 약간 이게 몸에 좀 배이게 해야 돼요.
Right. So he's giving the best tip for him giving us to like the early Soulfist players is this energy release is 6 seconds. It's a 6-second buff that increases your damage on all your skills. So what he said was he practiced hitting the scarecrow like even 3 hours, right? He'd been hitting the scarecrows for 3 hours because when you're fighting like Valton, when you're fighting like a higher level raid, what happens is like he moves around and everyone's moving around, etc. All this stuff. So you need to be aware of that 6-second window so that the skill combination comes out naturally. As you guys can been seeing when he was doing stuff, he uses the energy release, and when the energy release is done, he noticed the exact 6 seconds, and within that 6 seconds, the cooldown of the skill is different too. For example, let's say you're in hype 1 mode, or hype 2 mode, or hype 3 mode. How many skill does it go in within that 6 seconds, right? So it's important for you to practice the combination of all the things that is required in that time to execute the number of skills accordingly. So these kind of practices require you guys to practice. Yeah.
그리고 또 알면 좋은 게 제가 아까 막 사이클을 막 이렇게 막 굴렸잖아요.
네.
근데 몬스터가 이제 가만히 있지 않을 거 아니에요.
네.
그래가지고 약간 좀 유동성 있게 되게 많이 해야 돼요. 그래서 만약에 일단 나나격이랑 사멸파가 주들기인데 이 뭐 내공 마주 썼다가 열의 신장 썼다가 기공자 썼다가 다 못 쓰잖아요.
네.
그래서 약간 패턴에 좀 익숙해져가지고 얘가 이제 막 딜 타임이 되게 짧아요. 그럴 때는 이렇게 다 못 넣으니까 뭐 그럴 때는 이제 그냥 내공 방출 쓰고 최대한 나나격이랑 주들기만 박는다는 생각으로.
So for
아까 짤
example, 그리고 어떤 거요?
그리고 아까 말씀드렸던 게 순보 같은 게 이제 얘네를 박은 다음에 얘가 날라갔어.
네.
날라갔으면 이제 그때는 이제 순보로 이제 짤 스킬들 넣어주고.
Right. So for example, you have, let's say the boss doesn't stand still, right? So what he was explaining was since the boss doesn't stand still, after the energy release, you always focus on getting the merciless pummel and then your energy blast to squeeze in. And then let's say he runs away, right? And then you have something like a flash step to increase that buff again. Because the flash step, remember, the flash step tripod also gives you attack buff as well. So you flash step right after, and then use your other skills. Something like Heavenly Squash or Force Orb on top, and then you can use Merciless Pummel again because your cooldown's so fast. So I think that kind of stuff requires you to be good at the class to begin with. Like this has to do with none of your builds or anything. It has to do with the player's skill. For example, let's say the Valton jumps away, right? You will need to act quickly and adjust it accordingly to do a lot of DPS within with this class. That's why this class is one of the hardest ones, at least to be honest, for me hearing it.
그리고 또 솔직히 이게 가장 중요한데 일단
Got some more important stuff.
네. 이 세미타통 유저들의 모두의 고민이에요. 일단
네.
보통은 이제 세미타통이 2단계로 많이 다르거든요.
네.
근데 이 시간을 이걸 다 태우는 게 좋냐, 아니면 3단을 빨리 키는 게 좋냐.
네.
이건데 이거는 진짜 변수가 너무 많아가지고 진짜 본인의 판단이 가장 중요합니다. 이것도 예시를 좀 들어줄 수가 있는데 일단 말씀 한번
네.
드리고.
So for example, this is the most important. Apparently, the most important. There's a lot of important things, which someone already said in chat. So he said that most people turn hype level 2, and then the biggest question is, are should you use hype 2 to the very end and then go hype 3, or when should you go hype 3, etc. All these things are actually, there's so many variables to a point that there's no real right answer. I guess this kind of feels like for the same for any class, right? But we're going to talk about this a little more in terms of examples.
일단 만약에 좀 북미에 나와 있는 지금 발탄을 좀 예로 들자면은 이제 처음에 그 기둥에 파괴하는 페이지가 넘어가고 이제 발탄이 뭐 하늘로 올라가고 약간 그 폭포전 타이밍 그 전에 있죠.
네.
그 전에 약간 딜 타임이 좀 있잖아요.
네.
근데 이제 그때 만약에 내가 2단을 키고 막 딜을 넣고 있었어.
네.
딜을 넣고 있었는데 내가 이제 다 태우고 나서 3단 켜야겠다고 3단 켰는데 내가 위로 올라가 버린 거야.
네.
그럼 나 지금 타고 있잖아요. 그럼 이 상태로 이제 그냥 딜이 날아가 버려서
네.
그래가지고 약간 그런 좀 체력바나 뭐 그 보스의 패턴 같은 걸 좀 미리미리 계산하고 지금 그냥 켜야겠다. 그런 순간순간 판단이 되게 중요합니다.
So for example, for those of you guys who played Valton, right? When Valton, when he jumps up all the way up in the air and does that pizza with the pillars, so when Soulfist have that second hype mode and then you're doing the damage, and all of a sudden you turn on your hype 3 mode and then the Valton just jumps away. So for that empty 20-second window, you can't do anything, right? So it is important for you to check the boss's HP bar as often as you can. Yeah, with the cry. So check the HP bar as often as you can to calculate if you should turn on your hype 3 mode or hype 2 mode on. To that, you have to calculate the 20-second advance. They got kind of look into the future, I guess, right? I guess that's the hard part. So one of his tips are, you have to manage your hype 2 mode and hype 3 mode accordingly based on, so since Valton's gonna be doing this combo or doing this phase or doing this cutscene, I'm gonna save it, or I'm gonna not do it yet, and when he turns back in, I'll probably do it afterwards.
그래서 좀 요약을 드리면은 최대한 좀 미리 설계를 해서 3단을 최대한 많이 받고 좀 약간 어쩔 수 없이 피해야 되는 기믹이나 수행해야 되는 그럴 때 이 옹기 조식을 다 태우는 게 좋다.
Yep, and that's why he also said, for example, if Valton runs away, or if you know a certain cutscene is coming, it is good to burn that hype 3 meter and then have this the recovery mode within that cutscene, because your cutscene or a particular gimmick that requires you to move around and not do any damage, that's when you kind of take your break, and then you squeeze in that time, and then you put your break time on all the cutscenes. That's how the better Soulfist players do. There's a lot of examples too. That Valton one is a good example. And the grab mechanic, right? The grab mechanic that Valton does at 60 meters, that's also a good example. He's going to do the grab and he's going to do the cutscene anyway, right? So before that cutscene happening, you burn all that hype 3 meter and then you cancel it by pressing X 누르면 캔슬되죠, 바로.
네, 맞아요. X 누르면 캔슬돼요.
So before you go into that cutscene, you press X right away so you can recover right after, right? So those kind of mini tips, the mini tricks, will increase your damage like a lot, because that's how you control your strongest point in Soulfist and the weakest point in Soulfist. You want your weakest point in Soulfist being on the cutscenes because no one's gonna do attack anyway, and the strongest point of Soulfist when you can do the most damage. I mean, this is like an obvious theory, but not many people do it, surprisingly, and it's because it's that hard, because you're focused into the fight. and you don't get to see the additional stuff. That's also why he said that he practices a lot of the combos in Trixian so that he can naturally figure out the skill combinations within the energy release to a point that when a certain situation comes in, he kind of knows, okay, maybe I should turn on my hype 2. Okay, maybe I should turn on my hype 3, and then chain in 6 skills, 7 skills, 8 skills. And then within this energy release on hype 2 mode, I can squeeze in 5 skills. I can squeeze in 4 skills, etc. Right? And then let's say the cutscene's coming up soon, you turn it off immediately, and when the cutscene's over, you turn on the hype mode again, and then do the cycle again within because he knows exactly how many skills fits in within that time frame. Even if the boss moves, he can use the flash step to cover it up for that additional bonus buff, and then use the skill afterwards as well.
네, 기공사의 비기 수리컴부터 일단 보여드리면 될 것 같은데 저는 일단 각성 이렇게 5짜리 3개를 넣고 다녀요.
Ah,
궁극기 횟수랑 쿨타임 때문에.
right. So this is the swap. This is the awakening swap. Even Zeals do this. The funny stuff.
이래서 지금 보여드리면은 궁을 쓰고 이거 키고 수리 ESC.
That pet cancel.
네, 궁 누르고 패키 키고 수리 누르고 ESC.
Yep.
그리고 다시 스위칭 원래 걸로 한 다음에
And then he switches to his regular
네,
items.
투가입니다.
Oh, and then he just goes in. 오, 낙연장에 있기 때문에 파폭이 필요 없나 보네요.
네, 파폭이 근데 원래도 저 회전 격추로도 되는데.
Yeah, see, so you notice he turns in that energy release before doing his skills, and then he uses that flash step to go back. So I will do most of the commentary, and I told him you can focus on your gameplay instead of trying to explain. Right, look at that flash step though.
아이고 실수했어.
난 모르겠음. Nice, that counter. Look how nice that counter is. So as you notice, you don't always have to focus on doing the back attack, guys. Look at that. Look at that squeezing all these DPS in. Because he knows when he's stunned. So he's at his recovery mode, but he still uses the energy release and doing the DPS accordingly. And then he activates that domination set again. You saw that, right? Doing the awakening. That flash step back and forth, that was so sick. Alright, the Merciless Pummel is doing the combination of the skills. He's waiting a little bit, energy release after, and then does it. So his hype meter's filling up, right? Before then, he's just doing the energy release, and then all the other skills accordingly. So this is another point where you're supposed to have a high swiftness, right? Because if you have the high swiftness, even at your recovery mode, you can keep that domination buff up. There you go. So this is the part where he throws the countering. So look at this. So he has his bar ready to go, but he's not gonna use it. You guys know why he's not using it, right? Because he's gonna run away, right? And after he comes out, he gets his hype mode ready up, and then his awakening's coming back too. Right? The energy. So, but this is the important thing. Every time he uses the energy release, he uses everything accordingly. As in, like, okay, in this energy release at this particular time, I can squeeze in 2-3 skills, or 2-3 skills, 2 skills, or even 4 skills. I think this is the more important part of how they utilize Soulfist. Right? So he does that awakening, and now he's probably gonna get ready to utilize the big DPS when he's stunned. So what he's going to do his mechanic, where he's going to oh, there you go, this is his other mechanic. He turned that level 3 hype mode to do that big DPS, because what he's going to do is he's going to counter, and then he's going to push in all the DPS that he can. Yeah, see? That big deeps. That piano mode. Look at that.
이렇게 보통에서 궁도 많이 쓰거든요. 궁에서 선물식 이렇게 땡기고 있으면은 돼가지고.
And that spacebar. This is like the craziest space the piano class I've ever seen. So you notice he has his awakening up, but he also has the dominion buff still, right? So he doesn't need to use his awakening yet. Because his purpose of awakening, oh nice. He finished it so fast. Wow.
계속 패턴이 꼬여가지고 좀 걸렸네요.
He said this pattern was a little bit off, so it was slower. That means he can do it even faster.
첫 페이지 때 라드 빨고 하면은 2페이지를 바로 넘어가가지고.
Apparently he can skip phases. Wow. All right, guys. The second one with the energy blast. But since you need the help on the weak point.
데미지 뜨는 거 하나는 또 이게 서열파가 또 진짜 나노격급이라서.
So he's going to show you the big deeps with the energy blast. Get ready. This is the absolute ceiling of energy overflow Soulfist, guys. Absolute. These numbers though. So since you're squeezing in so much DPS. So since you have the energy blast too, just pushes it a little bit. Wow. So his level 2 hype mode's almost done. Putting it to level 3. Pushing in even more DPS. So he's going to be the Hanu's gonna be stunned. And then he helps with the destruction. The supports. Wow. Now he's going to recovery mode, but it's still fast. Dude, this is the amount of pianoing and then managing the skills is pretty difficult. This class is amazing, dude. Guys, I've been telling you guys, Soulfist is really good. Like, it's just a really hard class. It just feels so bad in the early game, but if it goes to the end game with the right amount of stats and everything, look at all the numbers that's like generating. And that reset, only 40 seconds, man. Only 40 seconds on that awakening. And then he has that full dominion buff, the cooldown and everything. Wow. There's a reason why Benji's saying Soulfist so good. He said he loves his Soulfist. You can see why too. And then he has that conviction judgment popped out as well. So and then when he's stunned, look at that. He goes to type 3 mode right away because he's stunned. Youch. It's one of the best class. But look how much damage is dishing out when he's stunned. So in a particular raid or any other different raids, right? Sometimes when you have an open space like that, you can still burst. So you can do both consistent and burst damage. And for Soulfist's case, well, he died already.
네, 소멸 파워가 훨씬 타수도 많고 딜은 진짜 센데 보시면 좀 약간 좀 경직적이라서.
내가 네 명이서 잡는 거랑 똑같은 스피드지. Holy shit, dude. He dies just as fast as I kill it with 4 people. Holy dude.
Cool.
This is so strong. Damn.
재밌습니다, 기공사.
Wow, dude, I am impressed. by the Soulfist. Guys, let's do the conclusion.
한국 서버에서도 솔직히 세메끼 공사는 좀 어렵고 불편하다라는 인식이 좀 많이 박혀 있어요. 일단 내공 방출, 또 금강성공의 타이머로 인한 약간 압박감, 그리고 운영, 그리고 뭐 단죄 심판, 뭐 높은 특성으로 인한 부담감 등 많은 제약이 있지만 그만큼 좀 단순히 아이템 레벨이랑 강화로만의 성장 체감이 아니라 로스타크 자체를 이해하면서 좀 성장해 나가는 매력적인 직업입니다.
In conclusion, guys, I asked him, is anything, for lastly, the stuff that he wants to share is, so right now, even in the Korean server, Energy Overflow Soulfist is a class that has been marked as not as popular due to it being tough, right? However, some of the stuff, as you guys may know, when you guys are increasing your specs, right, as in you level up eye levels, you know, you get new engravings, etc. This particular class, you can also have a third set of feeling where you're getting better at the game, which is your skills too, which that's very interesting to me, because like if you know, the more you know about Lostark, your energy overload Soulfist is going to be better, because as you guys may know, the hype management, the energy release management, all that stuff, I know what you guys are thinking, because like, oh, if you just play the game better, it's better, right? But this class in particular, the better you are, it just scales much more, right? So one of those giga chat classes, guys. So I think like in terms of people who are recommending, Soulfist is not a bad class. It's a very good class, and it will reward you the better you get at the game in terms of your knowledge, at overall knowledge at the game, and all these things. And this is what he wanted to say, as in this is a very high skill ceiling class, and it's going to reward you the better you do.
뭐 다른 직업들도 약간 레이드 하다 보면 좀 그런 느낌 들긴 하잖아요. 약간 와 이거 진짜 잔열 떴다 싶은 느낌. 나 진짜 잘 쳤다. 내가 진짜 이거 무조건 잔열이다라는 느낌이 다 들긴 할 텐데 세맥은 진짜 그게 엄청 확실히 와요. 왜냐면 3단 때는 이제 다른 직업보다 거의 로스타크에서 거의 1티어급의 데미지를 뽑기 때문에 내가 3단을 얼마나 많이 자주 박았다라는 성취감이 약간 매번 레이드마다 있어요.
So every raid, this is also interesting for you guys who are wanting to do MVP on DPS, right? This is his thoughts. So sometimes when you guys play a DPS class, you go, oh shit, I think I did some good DPS, I might get MVP, the DPS MVP. You know those thoughts? This class in particular, if you have that thought of I think I'm gonna get DPS MVP, usually you will happen to have an MVP, is because the third hype mode, doing all the dish out damage, if you played perfectly on the third hype mode, usually you're the strongest, one of the strongest class in the whole game, because the third hype mode, right? You have this 20-second frame of doing the most damage in the game, almost more damage in the game, because your cooldown's fast, your damage is increasing, etc. But imagine you wasted that level 3 hype. That means you took away all those damages, and the other class is going to outscale you. But imagine you played that perfectly every time in a raid. You have that good feeling that, hey, maybe I think I'm going to be MVP for this raid. Usually, apparently he said, usually, if you think that you played perfectly with the Energy Overflow Soulfist, you usually get MVP because you played perfectly. So, as I said in the beginning, where this class rewards you playing well, right? And this is one of those classes that will reward you by playing really well. Yep.
그래서 아무래도 또 아까 말씀드렸던 타이머가 있다 보니까 약간 빌드가 보통 있단 말이에요. 그래서 똑같이 그냥 늘상 하는 레이드여도 공대원들의 뭐 스펙, 뭐 그날 이제 딜러는 컨디션 이런 거에 따라서 똑같은 레이드인데도 맨날 약간 좀 다른 느낌을 받을 수 있어가지고 약간 익숙한데 익숙하지 않은, 매일매일 좀 새로운 느낌의 그런 직업입니다.
And also he says every day it's new for him, because since the character cycles so differently every time, and there's so many variables within the play style. You know, every day is like a new raid play style for him. So it's like he never gets bored of playing the game. And obviously, you guys have seen him use a bunch of skills, like, you know, the pianoing all the skills. It looked very fun to me. So he wanted to end it with showing his avatar. That's good.
네, 설명드릴 수 있는 거는 뭐,
감사합니다.
이 정도인 것 같습니다.
감사합니다.
네.
이게 정보도 엄청 많이 모으셔가지고 또. So what I talked to him about to conclude is, like, you know, the US players, you know, the Soulfist is not very popular, right? And then, you know, you guys play Robust Spirit as well. But, you know, there are so many different choices. This particular class every class is so unique, and every class, they should have a chance, and every class fits into a category of like it's fun for everyone. It has something for everyone, right? And then you should try to give some of these classes a chance, and then some of these classes just really good, just outscales, you know. So that's what I kind of wanted to talk about. And I think we had a really good time. And to wrap it up, yeah, so I will link as well later. It will be on the YouTube as well. So guys, you guys had fun, right? So this concludes the interview. So that was Energy Flow Overflow Soulfist, Mozza Dad.
네, 멋자.
MOZZA, right? MOZZA 맞죠?
네네, 맞아요.
Yep. That was Mr. Mozza Dad